countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, it is now time for more of the Last Comic Shop Podcast!
That's right. We are opening up the shop to newbies to help them find their way underneath this comic book tent, even if it's raining. Because it rains a lot in this, I think.
It can rain all the time, but we're keeping the lights on for the oldies and the moldies that will brave that rain to go flip through the dollar bin boxes out there to find some gems. Have a guest here today that helps me to do that very thing.
Yes. Well, before we begin, I'm the host of the most, Andy Larson. I'm joined by Chad Smith and Jay Scott, but that's not what you tuned in for. Anybody in the Pittsburgh area that loves to search through dollar boxes, we've got one of the gentlemen that makes that thing happen. That's right, Jon Engel from New Dimension Comic Books, one of our favorite comic book franchises in the entire Pittsburgh tri-state area. It's wonderful.
Your dollar boxes are chef kiss, sir. Chef's kiss.
So many good things I found in those dollar boxes, John. Sometimes Chad and I will just move from store to store like wandering vagabonds.
That's awesome.
Anyway, but John, you're not just here for dollar boxes. You also are in charge of one of the premier Comic Cons in the area. So why don't you tell us about your show coming up here very, very soon?
Yeah, Three Rivers Comic Con is June 1st and 2nd, first weekend of June, downtown at the David L. Lawrence Convention Center. Kids 8 and under get in free, 9 to 14 get in for like $5 or $6, and then adults is like under $20 unless you buy the weekend, which is a little bit more. You can buy your tickets now on our website, threeriverscomiccon.com, where you can also see the most ridiculously large comic creator guest list in the area. Like, I'm pretty sure the next biggest one might be like Detroit or Baltimore, maybe. Okay. Like we have some pretty heavy hitting guests this year. I'm really excited about it. We have some great panels lined up. We have a charity drink and draw lined up with Sammy Castillo. Don Simpson celebrating 40 years of Megaton Man, so we have him doing the convention beer this year. It's going to be awesome. I'm just super excited.
Your show is a great Comic Con. Anytime we go to cons, one of the biggest laments we hear from the fans is like, oh man, I miss when these were actually about comics. Three Rivers Comic Con is actually about comic books, comic creators. You're not only going to be able to talk to the people that are making some of the best comics out there, you're able to shop and find that issue you've been looking for. It really is a great comic book based Comic Con. So I thank you for that, sir.
Yeah, man. I'm pretty sure we have close to 20 comic vendors in the room, which is going to be great. And then we also have like Josh Blaylock from Devil's Due, CB Cebulski from Marvel. And it's probably now on the par of the guest list that we would get at Pittsburgh Comic Con back in the day. And that's kind of what we were aiming for. Mm-hmm. And it's great. But if you want to make sure that you get a parking spot, because there's a lot of stuff going on down there that weekend, including Arts Festival and Pride, Kenny Chesney concert.
Oh, man.
I really want just somebody to walk down there and be like, can you come to our con? And just like come and hang out. Like, I'm really excited about the whole thing. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But make sure you use Spot Hero or Park PGH. It'll help you find where the right spots are in the right garages. It'll help you hold your spot. You can buy it right now and have it ready to go for the whole day.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about your show for those folks that are even outside of the Pittsburgh area is the fact that it is in downtown Pittsburgh. So again, you're mentioning all these things that are going on at the same time as the con. For those folks coming in from out of town, that's actually pretty awesome that there's all these cool things going on in the city of Pittsburgh. We get to show off our wonderful city to those folks. So it's a beautiful city, and hopefully we got great weather coming up next weekend. So like, man, I that's what I love the most about it. It's not like out in the boonies somewhere. It's in downtown Pittsburgh so people can see everything.
Yeah. Pittsburgh is a very proud city. We love our communities. Every neighborhood has something cool going on all the time. Oakland is in uptown where there are like a million hospitals and it gets all crazy all the time. Downtown is where no one works anymore and there's just a shit ton of restaurants.
That's where Christopher Nolan got that idea for the third movie.
Got it. Well, he shot a lot in the South Side, so I mean, he was just lucky they didn't get shot, but whatever.
Well, let's talk about some of the wonderful folks that will be at Three Rivers Con this year. What's the guest list look like, John, for those people that are thinking about coming in?
So this is a Transformers 1 Maria Wolf Virgin Foil variant. It came back as a 9/8 signed, verified from CBCS. She's going to be there. She also did one for Duke, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Cobra Commander, and Thundercats. She did them all with Roops Comics. They're going to be actually set up across the aisle from her. She's going to be right beside Josh Blaylock, by the way.
Okay.
So Josh Blaylock's coming. If you guys know who he is, he's the guy that owns Devil's Due. Did a lot of G.I. Joe and Transformers in the 90s.
Brought G.I. Joe back to prominence.
It's true. He kept it alive. So this is a issue 1 of The Tribe by Todd Johnson and Larry Stroman. Larry Stroman, as many of you guys know, worked on like X Factor and Batman and Wolverine and a bunch of stuff, and it's awesome. They are relaunching this book at our show. Like the first time you'll be able to buy it in physical copy if you didn't Kickstarter it is at our show. And this book holds a record for the most sales by an all-African American creative team in comics ever. So for them to relaunch it is pretty sweet. This is Aurora by Sora Sung. She's going to be there. This is her original graphic novel. This is Lycan by my buddy Dennis Robinson. He's kind of an up-and-coming writer guy, but I really like this book, so I wanted to make sure I mention it. It's about the world's first werewolf. There are 2 volumes out now. The third one just finished on Kickstarter. He's from out near like Harrisburg, Gettysburg area, and he's a great dude. This book is awesome. You need to check out the art. And Maria Wolf did a variant for the third one for retailer only. So the retailer tier, all the covers are Maria Wolf variants. And we have some coming to the shop in, I think, October when it kicks in. This is GoBots from Tom Scioli, local guy. We love Tom. He just put out a new book called Witchman, which is also cool. And he's done...
That just hit shelves like 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah. I happened to run into him at a Burger King. My wife and I were at Burger King. We sat down, and she went to the restroom, and when I looked up, Tom and one of his kids are, like, in line. And then they sit, like, right beside us, and I'm just like, hey, Tom. He's like, oh, hey, what's up? Like, it was super weird, like, seeing him outside of a comic shop for once. I'm going to continue on and try to jam through these. This is Spider-Man Wayne Foucher.
Yep.
He's done this. He's mostly known for Impulse. He's doing Mandalorian Season 2 right now for Marvel. A bunch of Batman. He did some Sinestro stuff. Actually, I have a page of one of his Sinestro that he inks that I bought from him.
Wayne is tremendous for stories. Like every single time, he's great for stories.
Oh, yeah. Well, he and this guy, Mark Morales, who inked this book, who is working on Star Wars High Republic, I believe, and has done a lot of other stuff, are doing a panel called I'm Not a Tracer.
Yes. Good.
Take that, Kevin Smith.
It's about working in the industry as an inker. So if you want some cool inking stories, check that out. Those guys are great.
Yeah, both former interviewees here on the Last Comic Shop. Talked to both Mark and Wayne in the past. Great guys.
This is Dave Wachter's new book, Uncanny Valley.
Yes. Yes,
oh my God, this has been like my book of the week for like every time. Like issue 2 just came out this week. I reviewed it. It was my book of the week too. So good, so funny. And point of trivia, he designed the mom in there after his wife. Because I'm reading it and I'm like, did you draw this after your wife? And he's like, yeah, she's a nurse. I just had her, started drawing her. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. This is Feral #1. Both this and Uncanny Valley were written by Tony Fleeks, but he's not coming. This is Trish Forrester, who did the art for this. She did Stray Dogs with Tony. She does My Little Pony. She did a bunch of variants for Darkwing Duck.
Lots of good stuff.
A lot of Disney stuff. Yeah.
We talked with Tony when Stray Dogs was coming out, and Trish was there. Unfortunately, she was signing things at the time, so maybe I'll get a salt and pepper shakers. I always like salt and pepper. When I get both of them eventually, it's good.
Yeah, Trish is great, by the way. This is Garrett Gunn's Bad Girl. This is actually a Three Rivers variant from last year. He's coming back. If you have this from last year and you didn't get it signed yet, you can do that. And then the last thing I have is... And this is my personal copy. No, this is not getting thrown in the art auction like the other one. This is my ASM 252, one of 3 copies that I own. This one came back a 7.0. It's signed by Ron Friends and Jim Shooter. Ron is going to be at the show. We did get him to sign. There's a Funko Pop that has this in it with a black suit Spider-Man. I had him sign it, and he signed it Best Wishes, Ron Friends. So that will go in the art auction. So if you want to check out something cool at the art auction, go for that. But this was also CBCS. They're not doing grading on the spot. You have to bring stuff in, drop it off. But it comes back within 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. It's their ballpark right now. Most of the stuff that I got back was in like 6 days. It was crazy fast. They not only do comics, they do magazines, they do underground comics, which was a new announcement from last week, VHS, manga, sports cards, and then trading card game cards.
Wow.
So somewhere I have like a Italian volcanic island from Magic from like 1994 floating around. I think I'm gonna take that and get it graded too.
Well, look, we're going to finally have an opportunity, JA, to get your Fantastic 449 graded. So there you go. Yeah. If this be Doomsday, hey, make sure that you're checking out Three Rivers Con this upcoming weekend. It's going to be a fantastic time. The Last Comic Shop will be there. Me and Mikey Wood will be walking around. So make sure if you see us sporting our Last Comic Shop shirts that you say hello. So we're going to get to a commercial break, and coming up right after this, we're going to be back because Jon is not just a comic book store mogul. He is a comic book fan. So we're going to be talking about The Crow to wrap up Movie Mayhem. Stay tuned right after this.
Hey, it's Mikey Wood, frequent Last Comic Shop guest and collector. And as a collector, I'm always in need of boards, bags, long boxes, and more to house all those comics. That's why I use promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off my orders at bcwsupplies.com. Not only does it get me a discount on BCW's already low prices, but I know using LCSPOD at checkout is another way I can show my support to the Last Comic Shop podcast and their continuing mission to bring fans together under that big comic book tent. So if you're in need of comic book supplies, head out to bcwsupplies.com and use promo code LCSPOD today. That's LCSPOD.
We're all familiar with the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Modern Age of comics, but we can't still be in the Modern Age after almost 4 decades, can we?
We don't think so. And that's why we started the Iron Age of Comics, a critical re-evaluation of comic books from about 1985 to 2000.
On this podcast, we go beyond the chromium covers and the grim and gritty cliches, and take a deep dive into one of the most vibrant but divisive periods in comics history.
That's the Iron Age of Comics, with new episodes every first and third Wednesdays of the month. And look for us on social media, where the handle is at Iron Age of Comics.
All right, back with more Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for our Read Pile Review. Yes, that time of every single show where we like to talk about a comic book. And all this month, it's been about comic books that eventually were made into movies or featured characters that eventually made it into the cinema. And this is the last week of Movie Mayhem, so if you like this whole shtick, you're going to have to wait at least until they release Deadpool Wolverine will do something like that when that movie's released. But in any case, we're doing The Crow. It's JA's pick. So JA, who worked on The Crow?
Well, The Crow, the comic book and graphic novel and various, it was republished many times, was by James O'Barr. He was a former U.S. Marine and enlisted in the late 70s. And he wrote The Crow in 1981 while he was stationed in Germany following the untimely death of his fiancée, who was killed by a drunk driver. So he was using the medium of a comic book to sort of deal with her passing and to get through the grief of her death. And it just sat on the shelf for like 7 years until he found someone who would put it out. And it came out by Caliber Press in 1989. It was a 4-book miniseries. And then since then, there's been a 5th book added and some other stuff to round out the story that everyone knows today as The Crow. So that is it. It's beautiful black and white art. And Chad, tell us what happens in these initial 4 and now 5 books of The Crow.
So The Crow, part of the backstory was, in addition to his fiance's passing, he was also supposedly inspired by reading a news story about a couple that was murdered for an engagement ring. And so that's what happens in The Crow. There is a couple, and they are murdered by a gang of street toughs. The gentleman comes back as the Crow and basically hunts his way down through the gang members one by one and exacts his revenge now that he is impervious to bullets and has a bird to give him advice. And it's real dark and real graphic, and that's The Crow.
Right. I want to start off by saying that when I asked Jon to be on this week's show, not only to pump the tires of Three Rivers Con, I said I want him back to do another movie mayhem show with us. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, we're going to do The Crow. And he seemed very excited at the time. So, Jon, what's your Crow story like?
So my first experience with it was actually the movie in the early 90s. And then I finally read the book probably like 98, maybe 2000. And I hadn't touched it again until this week when I had to reread it.
Okay.
So I bought the special edition, which is available in softcover and hardcover from Gallery Books. It was cool to like revisit this because I hadn't read the original one in so long, but I've read some of the offshoots. There were a couple good ones. There were a couple not so good ones. This one always was pretty high caliber for me. I like the special edition version because it has like a bunch of forward. It's got a lot of bonus material in the end, like all the extra covers. And I love the art in it more than anything else because it covers so many different styles. Like there's moments where it's like a really underground book and, you know, he looks like Dream. And then there's moments like where they're doing the flashbacks. It's very sleek, but yet not super toned because it's almost like pencil of like what you would think of when people do like human study where like they have like a naked model.
Like drawing right? With charcoal pencils.
Yeah. Especially all the stuff with Shelley. Like anytime you see Shelley, it's very like pencil, almost charcoal type thing. I love that, you know, the Skull Cowboy's in here that we don't see in the movie, which I think he's going to be in the new one, though. I'll be honest, the only thing I don't like about this book, rereading it, is the order in which the story takes place. The first book is I'm walking into the boardroom and killing everybody. And then it kind of tells the story backwards from what the movie was. And I don't know if it's just because I'm older now. I like the movie version slightly better because the story, I think, flows better. Even though this has more detail and more stuff, and the movie kind of puts some random things in there too. This story starts pretty much with the ending, and then you see the beginning at the very end. Like it just backtracks as he's hunting down his people that murdered him and Shelley and did the whole thing. And there's some really good parts. There's stuff where it's painted, the medium's all over the place, and it's really a great almost collage of James O'Barr's styles that he can do. And after I read this, I'm like, no wonder him and David Mack are friends. This is, you know, it's like if you've ever read Kabuki, same deal stylistically.
Oh, I just loved it, especially the dream sequences where he's going back and you know, remembering his time with Shelley, because it's very soft. I mean, if there's no hard lines in it, it's almost like if you were watching it in a movie, they put a piece of gauze over the lens or something. It's all soft focus, and it's done so well. The techniques, sometimes like charcoal pencil, sometimes it looks like he's doing watercolors with it. That use of negative space, because in the dream sequences, it's a lot of white negative space, and then he's using like in sort of when he's getting vengeance, there's a lot of black negative space. So I thought that just playing with the black and white medium and it all flows so well together, and it always the exact perfect technique to use for that sequence of panels or pages. I thought it flowed really well.
Yeah, and you could tell how personal this story is. I mean, and I don't think if this were put out through a bigger publisher that you would have seen James O'Barr been able to stretch his artistic muscles as much as he does in this book. Because I'll admit on a critical note, sometimes his art can be a little inconsistent. You know, you can tell the homemade nature in play here. And I think that's more of a feature than it is a bug. But yeah, he really does go all all over the place in terms of styles and, what he thinks is best for the scene, and then what's going to accompany those Joy Division lyrics. But he does play in many different fields and many different avenues to do what he wants to do in this book.
Well, I'm gonna jump in here again. The art is wonderful. I'm never going to fault the Crow for the art, and the subject matter, although personal, he's really trying to work through some feelings with this particular book, and that's commendable. I don't know if this particular story aged very well. We've seen other stories that tend to use this same theme of vengeance, and the spirit of the dead coming back, and it's an older kind of thought, right? Like we've heard these stories around the campfire all the time about somebody. There was a murder and something, and then he came back from the dead and he wreaked vengeance on all those that did him wrong. And it's a very classic story. But I had a hard time with this book sometimes. I felt like the language was a little bit too, I don't want to say flowery. It was just too over the top at times. It didn't cut to the chase enough. He was doing some poetry or waxing his philosophical, and I just didn't need it, especially when you would then switch from that to then a really dark and violent tone with the killings and stuff. It was, as much as I like the art, the story, I think, was told better in the movie, to be very honest. And we'll get to that in a second. And especially some of the dialogue. It's almost like he didn't have an ear for how people really talked this. And gentlemen,
he was in Detroit. I mean, he is a missioning guy.
I mean, come on, guys. I mean, Chad, you had said some things.
Oh yeah, no, I hate the story. This is a not for me story. But no, it's tough for me to look at this book because you have to approach it two different ways. The first way, reading through this is the journals of an angsty, traumatized teenager working through his issues. But also, this is, a human that's dealing with trauma working through his issues. So this is somebody it seems like James O'Barr, and I don't know James O'Barr, I've never spoken with James O'Barr. It seems like he's working through his grief and his anger through this book. And it's one of those things like Fight Club, right? I feel like it's definitely very easy to read this the wrong way and to take the wrong themes out of this and be like, oh, this is, torture, revenge porn. It's awesome. Look, he smashed that guy's face in. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, this is a lot of anger, and this is a lot of human dealing with their human issues. And so the bad poetry and some of the lines the Crow has, like when he's trying to be tough or strange or whatever, it's like, oh, I don't know there, buddy. At the same time, like, that's somebody working through their stuff. So it's, like I said, of two minds. As a story, like, I read about 40 or 50 pages of this. I'm like, oh, that was good. Let's be done. What? There's 150 more? Crap. But
I was there with you, buddy.
This speaks to people too. You can't discount, how much this tapped into the cultural zeitgeist. Everything from professional wrestlers like Sting to movies and music, and the movie The Crow that came out of it. I feel like this was like the godfather of grunge, the Gen X precursor to what would be the grunge movement. There's a lot of stuff going on in here that is impressive, and there's also a lot of stuff in here, like when he draws a horse. It's like, that doesn't work. Like, it's impressive and important, but I just don't like it.
You guys are all wrong. This is awesome. 50 pages in, it was just opening my eyes.
Oh, Lordy. It's a Nine Inch Nails song. It's Head Like a Hole, or I don't.
The more I think about this book, the more I kind of think it's definitely one of those King of the Underground comic books, right? Like Marvel and DC will never make something this dark ever.
Right.
The things I love about it are that it was him working his stuff out, and you can feel it. You can feel this book, which is great. The things I don't like about it are the way the story's told, a little bit of the dialogue, like the random poetry is kind of ridiculous. But for the most part, it gets the point across, and that's why I consider it a classic. Now, when we talk about the movie and the soundtrack, that's a totally different thing.
All right. Well, let's get to that movie and soundtrack with our ratings. That's right. So we're going to give a 1 out of 4 scale to The Crow, the comic book. J.A., what is our 1 out of 4 scale for the comic book?
Okay, so the comic book ran through sort of levels of pain and vengeance. So we're going to go like, how many levels of vengeance are you giving this book?
1 out of 4.
Levels of vengeance.
Yes.
I
That
think
sounds
that's
like an 80s video game.
That's like a trap, because that's going to be a high number because of so much vengeance in this book. This is the book that made Batman need to be darker, right?
Oh, yes, it really did. And so that's what I think. I'll go ahead and I'll start. Again, if there's big Crow fans out there, they might, nail me to a wall, but I am going to say this is a 2.5. This is a little bit above average for a comic book. And I say that because, again, I didn't read it until way, way after it was published. I had read other things that came after that. I had seen the movie by the time I read the comic book. And all I kept on thinking to myself was like, this story has been told. And although he's trying to work through his grief, this story has been told better by other folks. And so, like, it's hard for me to say, well, despite the personal nature of this book and how I'm glad that James O'Barr had an opportunity to exercise some of his anger and his angst over the death of his fiance, the story has been told better by other people. And honestly, I feel that the art is so good in this that at the end of the day, I really feel like this particular book serves a purpose in being like the good storyboards for what would eventually be the movie, right? If you ever see some storyboards in like art books or things for Star Wars or Raiders of the Lost Ark or something, they're just wonderful to look at. And I feel like that's what The Crow is. Like, it's like eventually it became a movie, but like all good movies, they start with good storyboards, and that's kind of sort of what The Crow is. It's like a good rough draft of a story that eventually was made better as a movie, honestly. And so it's a 2.5. No knock against James O'Barr. Again, I'm glad that he was able to write this, and I'm glad that it stuck with a lot of readers and watchers of the movie eventually. But it was a good rough draft, I guess. Chad.
Like I said earlier, I'm of two minds about this. I think as a comic book, it's not that great. And there are things I can point to, like, oh, look at that. That's how that works. It's more of a work of traumatic art than comic book. And there are things in here you would not be able to do today. There's the self-mutilation in this book, and like there's all kinds of really difficult stuff that's going through these pages. And then it's so artfully done in parts. And, we talked about how there's so many different styles at play, and the pieces of this, I think, are far stronger than the whole, when it's put together as a story. And like you were saying, where this is a good storyboard. And I could see something like this, helping people with grief and anger and those initial stages. I guess my problem is that it never goes beyond the anger stage, stuck in those first stages of grief and getting over something. And so if this is where someone stops, like, I don't think they're going to be in a great place. You got to keep going and keep working and, keep getting the help that you need. And it's sad because every time I read a little bit of background in James O'Barr, and he's like, yeah, he made this and he wasn't, when it's all said and done, he kind of regretted making it. And then the movie happens, and we'll get into the movie, and he kind of regretted the movie happening. And it's like all these things that he's put out there that have spoken to all these people, and still he hasn't been able to find that peace, that you hope for someone just on a human level. I'm going to give it a 3.25 because of the artwork, because of the fact that I think it is such a personal work, and it is something that could be helpful not just for James O'Barr but for others. It's more because of the pieces than what came out of it. I guess that's my asterisk, if that counts. I don't know.
J.A., your pick.
Yeah, I'm giving it a 3.75. I think this is great. You guys just obviously don't get it. Where's Mikey Wood? I'm sure Mikey Wood would have appreciate this. This seems to be something that would have been right up his alley. The art is incredible. You come for the art, you stay for the story. The story is, yes, it's gut wrenching. It is hard hitting. It is not easily approachable. It makes you uncomfortable. It makes you angry. For all of those reasons, that is why it has connected with so many people who are going through trauma and grief and being able to relate and connect to those characters. And did I mention the art? I threw it up on my computer screen, blown up 2 times size, and it was beautiful, absolutely breathtaking, especially those dream sequences. I mean, I would love to get a full page panel put into a poster of some of that stuff. It is that jaw-droppingly beautiful and incredible.
You want that barbed wire horse looking back at you? Those weird.
I don't know. Actually, I like that sequence. It was hard to get through. It was hard to get through the horse sequence. I didn't see the horse dying at the end of that. But this was born out of tragedy, and then tragedy seems to have followed it, and we'll get into it with the movie and the death of Brandon Lee. When they were going to wrap filming, he was going to marry his fiancée like the week later. It's just, there's a lot of tragedy and pathos all wrapped up into this book. It's such a beautiful book to have all of that baggage go with it. It's quite heavy at times.
All right, John, you finish us
Cue
off.
Robert Smith music in the background for J.A.
I've got my Joy Division right here.
I'm going to give it 3. For a lot of the reasons that all of us have talked about. And the kinds of stuff I already said, like the way it was told felt like it was weirdly backwards to me. Like when you start with like the vengeance ending and then you work your way back, it kind of just felt like a weird way to tell a story for me. But the art is gorgeous. And like I said, you can feel the trauma in this book. For those reasons, I'm giving it the 3 because of how important it is to comic book history. Because there's not a lot of books that you can feel it like that. A great example of an actual book, like a prose book, that was very similarly written was Interview with a Vampire. Anne Rice was blitzed out of her mind, grieving. And she wrote that whole book in 3 days and mailed it to her editor. And then the editor was like, "This is awesome." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" Like, she didn't even know she mailed it. And if you've ever read that book, you can really feel the characters in that too. And you can really do that in this book. And you can really get into this whole dark world of, and I say this as a former goth kid, like where pain is your best friend, like the emo kid is screaming, like that kind of thing, of what it did for other art too, like for music and film, is a huge key to this whole book. And that's why I'm doing a 3 out of 4, because I think it does more good than bad.
Very good. All right, we're going to be back with more of The Last Comic Shop right after these commercial breaks with that movie review of The Crow, as we have mentioned often in this review. So stay tuned for that.
Can you dream of a world immune to cancer? Hello everyone, my name is Nick and I'm the host of the annual live stream for The Cure, where content creators and podcasters from around the world join me to raise money for the Cancer Research Institute and immunotherapy research, which is training the body's immune system to fight against all forms of cancer. Over the past 7 years, thanks to the power of indie podcasters and the indie podcasting community and listeners just like you listening to this right now, we have raised over $90,000. And as I record this now, the 8th annual live stream for The Cure is barreling down upon us really, really quickly in just about 2 weeks. So join us, please, from May 29th through June 1st for 48 hours of amazing content from people all over the world and help us fight for a world immune to cancer. I'll now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. Thank you so, so much. And together, we can make a difference.
And we are back. And you just heard our commercial for a live stream for The Cure. We have been participating in this event for a couple of years now. And just on a personal level, it's one of the chances we have to give back. Sure, we have a podcast and we talk about comic books, and have a lot of fun. But this is a chance to do that in service of a group that's working to find a cure for cancer. That's the moonshot of our generation. And to know that we could play some small part, like, it just helps me to feel good. So if there's anybody out there that is willing to participate, to pledge, to help, not just this silly little podcast, but for some real genuine good in the world, that live stream in the Cure. I mean, Andy, you can talk to it. It's just huge.
It is, absolutely. And we hope that all of the Last Comic Shop fans do tune in for at least our portion of the show. That'll be on May 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We will be doing a live version of the Last Comic Shop with our good friend Mikey Wood. We'll be reviewing the Star Trek X-Men crossover, continuing our long tradition of doing awesome crossovers for the live stream of The Cure. So again, whether you were a fan of our Amazing Spider-Man Superman review, or our Superman Muhammad Ali, or last year's Batman Hulk, now we're doing Star Trek X-Men. I know X-Men is a huge hot button thing right now. Everybody's loving that X-Men 97, it seems. So have an opportunity to hear about the X-Men teaming up with Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock.
Live long and prosper, bub.
I want to do the Star Trek Green Lantern stuff. You let me know.
Oh, there you go.
For sure, man.
But yeah, make sure that you're tuning in all throughout that entire that several days of the live stream for Recure. But again, hopefully all you Last Comic Shop fans, you'll come at least for 7 p.m. May 30th. Give some money for cancer research and support this wonderful event. Any case, it is now time to get into the second half of Movie Mayhem and the movie review of The Crow, right, Chad?
That is it. And so this film came out in 1994. They are currently remaking it for reasons I'm sure we'll discuss. But J. Andrew Scott, can you tell us more about The Crow? Who made it?
This was a Dimension Films production directed by Alex Proyas on a screenplay from David Show and John Shirley, obviously based on the books and graphic novel The Crow by James O'Barr. Produced by Edward Pressman and Jeff Most, and starring Brandon Lee as Eric Draven and The Crow, Ernie Hudson, Michael Wincott as Top Dollar, and Bai Ling in her first major U.S. movie as Micah, a character not in the books, and then a bunch of B-listers rounding out the gang.
You just don't want to say the gang member names, like T-Bird, Skank?
No, yeah, sorry, yeah. So, yeah, we had T-Bird, Skank, Tintin, Funboy, Grange.
Remember, in the book, Skank was Tom Tom. So
yeah, that wasn't a street enough for this movie. They couldn't just call him Tom Tom. They were like,
no.
You know what? Actually, believe it or not, before we get into anything further, I just realized that like T-Bird is the name of a car, and he was a car guy. No, but he was working through his grief about the death of his fiance by a drunk driver. So it's interesting that he had the gang leader be a very famous car. I wonder if he did that on purpose.
Interesting so much so that why don't you just synopsisize the rest of the 1994 masterpiece, The Crow?
Well, The Crow is kind of different from the comic book for sure. There's a lot of subplots going on with the Crow movie that aren't in the graphic novel series at all, especially this whole character of Top Dollar, who seems to run some sort of giant criminal organization. And there's this thing called Demon Night where they burn down half the city for insurance money, which I think that's what it is. But long story short, Shelley lives in one of these low rent tenement buildings that's probably dilapidated or whatever. Tries to get some better living conditions for her fellow tenants, and Top Dollar doesn't like that. So he sends T-Bird to take care of both her and I guess things get out of hand when Eric, her boyfriend, who's also in a band. Was he in a band no, he wasn't.
He doesn't stop to shred for 3 pages.
He doesn't.
Sitting on a rooftop.
He's in a band in this. He plays a mean guitar, and
we'll talk about that.
Yeah, but he's there, and so things go sideways, and he's thrown out of a building. Eventually, he comes back, and he's given like a lot more power, it seems, than the Crow In the comic books, he basically regenerates immediately. He can basically disappear and reappear. He really is kind of like an angel of death.
I think the disappearing and reappearing is less supernatural. It's more Batman. Look over there. I'm gone.
But you're absolutely right, J.A. It is very much like if you took the Batman story and you just cranked it to 11. You were just like, how really dark and gritty can we make this and still get away with it? And that's really what had happened. I mean, I
was going to say, in my weaker moments, I pictured the crow, in order to make his crow symbols, like carefully walking out the crow design in lighter fluid, before the cool scene where he lights it on fire.
Yes, but it is truly the same story, though. In the end, Eric Draven becomes the Crow, wants revenge on the folks that killed and raped his girlfriend. And there's a young girl, and Ernie Hudson, who's a cop and doesn't really... his character's huge in this, which is great because I love Ernie Hudson. But that's the 10-cent synopsis. I love the movie, and the main reason I love the movie is because I love Brandon Lee, honestly. The guy had a natural charisma to him. The son of Bruce Lee, and he had charisma up the wazoo. But Brandon didn't fall very far from that tree. And
for folks that may not know, do you want to describe what happened with the Brandon Lee?
Yes, he was taken from us way too soon. He was on the set. I believe he only had a little bit left to shoot on the picture. Long story short, I believe it was a prop gun that was on... they didn't take the wadding out, or they took the wadding out?
No, so it was what they call a squib load. They were all real guns. And they had bullets in it that had no charge, but still had a primer for an up-close shot of the scene, so you could see the bullets and you could see it because it was a revolver. And then they pulled the trigger and the primer is still there, so it was enough to loosen the bullet, but not enough to eject the bullet. So the bullet was stuck in the barrel of the gun. They then took the gun, got rid of the rest of these show bullets, essentially, and threw in blank rounds, which are full rounds, but without a bullet at the end of it. But of course, the bullet was stuck in the barrel of the gun. So when it went off, it was like a gun shooting a bullet. And
right, the prop master wasn't there that day. It was some assistant in charge.
Yes,
right.
Do the proper procedures.
And it was the scene where he in the movie. It's the scene where he dies at the beginning, becomes the Crow. Essentially, the actor ended up having to take a year off. He was so traumatized by that, and when it happened, they didn't know what happened. They didn't even think that it was. They thought he was fooling around when he fell over.
And if you've noticed by J.A.'s description of the events. Again, at the time, they thought that this was like the Bruce Lee curse or something. Because again, if you think about it, there was a lot of things that had to happen in a very specific sequence of order in order for this tragedy to happen. So it was kind of like that's a lot of coincidence.
Yeah, and to go into what Chad had said earlier, James O'Barr later remarked that losing Brandon Lee was like losing his fiancée all over again. And it made him wish that he had never wrote the comic book in the first place. So you often see re-releases of the book are dedicated to Brandon.
Yeah, it talks somewhere. I read about how James O'Barr basically bought his mom a house, bought himself a new car, and then donated the rest of the money to charity. He thought it was kind of blood money-ish. Just gave it off because he just couldn't deal with that.
Right.
So...
But to my point, Brandon Lee, every single time he is on screen, it is electric. He delivers his lines with again, you could say that some of the lines could be a little bit cornball if given to a different actor in a different circumstance, but it never seems like that. It never seems over the top. It never seems forced and it's just, again, he had natural charisma and the camera loved him, and as a result, that all comes out in this movie, and that's why it really is a true tragedy, because
they picked the best lines and then they changed some of the other ones to make them cooler.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what the original story would have been, because when he was shot, they were mostly done with filming, but they hadn't completed it. So they did have to do some script rewrites. They added some scenes. They did obviously I think a lot of that guitar stuff is not him. They used some CGI to cover up for the shots they hadn't done yet. But again, I think 90% of his stuff had already been put in the can. So when we talk about the story in the movie versus the book, we don't know what that original would have been. Which gets me to the point is, why the heck are they remaking this film? I don't mind that they did, The Crow Part 2 or The Crow Part 3 or The Crow television series, which was add-ons and additions and taking the story in a different direction. But they should not be remaking this. Maybe that's me and it has a special place in my movie canon. I don't know. It's like you're walking on somebody's grave, literally walking on Brandon Lee's grave.
Yeah, it's tough because there are no new ideas in Hollywood, but you wish like they would leave this one alone, but just for all the things that are associated with it. But with all that said, I could understand the desire to go back to it because it's so damn cool. Like, this movie is a cool movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go around. I mean, there's a lot of great cool scenes in this. Maybe we'll do a cool scene roundtable. Everybody pick their favorite cool scene from The Crow. We'll start with John. John, do you have a cool scene from this movie that sticks with you? You're like, yeah, I love that scene.
I think my favorite scene, and this might actually be true for the book too, is where he's in Gideon's pawn shop. It flowed better in the movie because it wasn't just he's just looking through random rings because he doesn't know that the actual ring was put there. In the movie, Tintin actually takes it there and he's actually hunting down Shelley's ring. So he finds it, and then the whole the shotgun filled with rings to blow up the place, the misquoting Edgar Allan Poe, the taking the guitar with him too, that was all very, very cool. And I think for me, that scene I think may have stuck with me since I think I was 12 or 13 when the first movie came out. And as a budding musician at the time, that scene was very, very cool because it was like, look how badass he is in his trench coat. And he's just walking in here demanding his stuff back. And yeah, take that guitar. This movie would be nothing without that soundtrack. They found the perfect soundtrack for it. So there's scenes where T-Bird's riding around and you hear Big Empty and you're just like, oh man, that's awesome. Or Fun Boy and the Mom and Milk Toast by Helmet is playing. And I'm just like, yeah, because this soundtrack is what got me into Helmet. It was crazy. But that pawn shop scene is probably my favorite scene of the movie.
All right.
I'll say too, John Polito chewing the scenery as Gideon. He was just great.
Yeah.
The smart mouth, Crow's tearing him apart. And he's still mouthing off. Crow's on his way out the door. He's like, they're gonna get ya.
All right, Chad, you're up next. What do you say?
Oh man, that's tough because it is just the soundtrack that makes it so cool. It's everything's so over the top. I can't think of any one particular scene.
I can. I'll give you one. I'll give you two. I'll give you three.
Go ahead, Jay. Help me out. Tag in.
All right. Wait, you've got to love the scene at the end of the movie where the girl's in the church and she calls out and Eric's at the grave. And then he hears her yell, and he puts down the flowers, and he walks, and he opens the church door, and it's raining behind him, and he's backlit, and he's all dark, and the crow flies around, and he's got the wet hair, and he's looking through his eyes, and he looks like he looks like Sting. That's where Sting got the wrestling look from.
Shots of the grave in the church, and the grave in the church, and the rain, and the ambiance.
And then there's the end scene where the bad guy gets knocked off the church roof and he's falling down and he lands on the gargoyle's horns, and then the blood's coming out through the mouth of the gargoyle in a massive flow, way more blood than a human being could ever have, but just looks awesome. There's the boardroom scene where he walks in and he throws the chair away, and then he jumps up and sits down on the board table and he goes, come on, kill me.
Very intense. My favorite scenes were all scenes involving Ernie Hudson. Whether it's ordering hot dogs with extra onions and the little girl's like, they make you fart. Or Ernie Hudson talking to the detective and be like, I bet you're going to call that graffiti. I think it's blood. very wry performance from Ernie
He
Hudson
was
in this one.
wonderful in that. Just as somebody, for somebody looking for visual cues that didn't read the Crow comic, but he knows about comic books in general. Like, he is Commissioner Gordon to the Crow's Batman. That's the easiest way you can explain it to somebody that may not know. And it works. It always works to have like that dark vigilante and then like the cop that's like, I got your back, and he comes into the church, I've got the shotgun, and then another shotgun, and then 3 other guns, and Ernie Hudson.
Oh, I guess I messed that up, and he's laying there.
It's wrong day to quit smoking. It's just nice. I can't believe nobody said that scene with the knives, and he like catches the knife in his hand.
Oh,
that was
so fight. Oh,
that
it's so
was
good.
so Bruce Lee.
So good.
Again, I talk about how like Bruce Lee had this natural charisma, Brandon Lee, his son, had this natural charisma, and that whole catching the knife right in front of the face, that was something that his dad would do, and it was magical for me. That just, so before he even gets the coat, he's looking for his clothes. It's nice. I love that scene. Oh man, well, we got to wrap this up. We're gonna get to ratings of the Crow movie. JA, what's our 1 out of 4 scale for that Crow movie?
Well, one of the big changes in the movie from the comic book was that the Crow was actually alive and much more part of the movie than it was in the book. In the book, the Crow was sort of this spiritual guide.
And was an actual crow, not a raven, which is a different thing too. So
in the movie, it's flying through the night sky. It's pecking out eyes of Bai Ling before she keels over and dies. It is very much more of a protagonist. So we're going 1 out of 4 crows. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Raven crows.
Yeah. I'm gonna start off like I did in the previous segment. I'm going to give this a good solid 3.5. This is a great movie. It's not the perfect movie. I mean, there's better comic book movies out there, but I really do enjoy it. And every single time I see it, I'm reminded of not only, again, what a great movie this is, but again, what a tragic loss it was to lose Brandon Lee, because he could have made a ton of other awesome movies like this. And so it's really sad that we didn't get to see. I love Rapid Fire. Am I the only one that loved Rapid Fire? I love that movie. And so this is a great follow-up to that. I won't lie, it's hokey at times. There's that scene on top of the church where like he pulls out the top and uses it as a sword. And I'm just like, all right, well, and there's a lot more random subplots, like the top dollar thing and the whole Demon Knight, and kind of trying to explain more about why, these random people, instead of it just being a random act, which is, I think, what the original Crow was all about. It was like, again, to the drunk driver that killed his fiance in real life. Like, it's just the randomness of life and crime and chaos. Mm-hmm. As opposed to this being like, I wrote this letter and now we're gonna kill it. But it's still awesome. Great soundtrack, great visuals. Brandon Lee's awesome. 3.5. Chad.
So remember all the gushy stuff about the comic book where I'm like, oh, this is someone working through their trauma. Very important, very artful. The movie itself was traumatic because of what had happened, and it's very sad, very sorrowful. But the rest of it is just cool. It's this revenge porn, like, taken and slicked over, and they make this story where it's the purge, Devil's Night, chaos and everything, and it's all a big master plan, and there's all this great music going on, and everything's dark, and there's black leather and black trench coats, and it's raining all the time, but it can't rain all the time because that's what he said in his band and that album that little girl listened to before she got the hot dog farts and learned to stop eating onions. There's just a lot of fun stuff in the movie, and it just makes it all that much more tragic, like you had said. So I'm going to agree with you, Andy. I'm going to say 3.5. I saw this in the theaters when I was 14 years old, and it spoke to me. And does it have the artfulness of the comic book? I don't think so. But does it have a smoother story and a weird antagonist that smooches his sister, and a bird that's the real source of the powers? And like, they added enough hokey stuff to make everything else more palatable and less dark and severe and artful. And I'm happy for that.
All right, J.A.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a 3.5. Though I do maybe not take exception, but I think it is as artful as the book in a different way. I mean, you look at this and you think of this movie as a superhero movie. It has a very different aesthetic than anything getting out of the MCU, and even anything you got out of Zack Snyder's DCEU, or even the Batman movies at the time, or the Nolan Batman movies. Maybe Nolan draws a little bit of inspiration from it. It's very grungy, and it was shot on not a elaborate budget. You can tell that a lot of the thing was shot on 2 blocks of backlot somewhere, with a lot of their budget must have gone to the rain effects and the amount of water that they had to pump down. But man, does it hold up. And I was watching a 4K digital transfer of it. It looked great. Dark and moody and full of shadows. And everyone's mentioned the soundtrack. The soundtrack, is a soundtrack of, I think, all of our youth. You've got The Cure, you've got Stone Temple Pilots, Nine Inch Nails, Rage, Violent Femmes, Helmet, Pantera. I could go on. So yeah, 3.5 for me. Just great.
All right. We'll finish up with John. So John, what's your rating?
I'm going to round it out with another 3.5. This movie is generational. It hits all the right beats. And I kind of said this earlier, like it corrects the storytelling to where I like this story in this format better versus the book, because the book kind of hops around a lot for me. But the only reason I wouldn't give it higher than that is, as someone who does play guitar, the scene on the roof where he's shredding, he's literally just jerking that thing off. Like, he's not actually playing it. He's just chick waiting. Like, however you want to look at it. Come on, man. They couldn't have gotten somebody in there to actually play this thing. Like, what the hell? But then he takes it and he like wails it into the amp and he kicks it off the roof and he throws it. It's very heavy metal and very rock and roll. This movie, I mean, it's a staple for anyone who's gone through a goth phase, for sure. But, it's one of those things where it speaks to people for the right reasons. Going back and reading about some of the scenes that were reshot without him that are CGI, it's weird because like the makeup lady apparently like made a mask of him to where the slits would be, like where the makeup would be, so they could just make his stunt double exactly the same. So the scene where he's falling out of the window is CGI'd face on his stunt double. The scene walking out of like fog and you can't really see his face and the crow like flies beside him, that's his stunt double. That's not even him. And I think that I even made it to the poster, or one of the posters for it. It's crazy. There were scenes that were cut out that were the Skull Cowboy. That the Skull Cowboy is the one who is actually the voice of the crow in the books. So it was. I'm very, very curious to be like, did they just not finish all of those sequences, and that's why those were all cut out of there, or did it just not make sense? I like the slight supernatural end that they put onto it, where it's like the crow is the source of the power, because that kind of was alluded to in the books, but it never was really prominent. I didn't really like I'm going to steal people's eyes and then do coke with them, and like and then we need to steal the crow's eyes and we need to kill the crow, because then they did
and the sort of incestuous sister
that was
relationship, weird Tony Montana mound of cocaine.
Oh, yeah. And then, when they did City of Angels, they went way too hard, and they were like, oh, we're just going to make this about killing this actual crow. But that movie at least had Iggy Pop in it, which I guess Fun Boy was designed after. So,
okay.
But yeah, I read like a whole bunch of trivia about it afterwards, because I was like, oh man, I haven't seen this, and it still holds up, and it's great. And, the tragedy part of it that links it to the generation that knew about it when it happened. We could literally talk about this movie for hours, and every time the Brandon Lee part will come up, like the fact that he died on this will come up. It always held a special place in my life, knowing that this was his final work and it was so good, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to that's my segue to the new one. maybe with the new one, that's what we're actually going to get. Maybe we're actually going to see what that original script was and get all the parts to it. Because from the trailer, like, still crazy gratuitous violence, it's still pretty much the Crow. Cool. I think Skarsgård's a great actor, and I think he's going to do well with it. The only thing I don't really like are the face tattoos, but the chest tattoos, like one of them, I think the Crow Mamori book, like that guy had tons of tattoos, and they were almost the same ones. So who knows? Maybe it actually won't be Eric. It'll be really funny if it isn't. But considering he's yelling Shelly at one point.
Well, that's all the time we have for Last Comic Shop this week. Make sure that you're reviewing and subscribing over at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com and looking out for myself and a frequent Last Comic Shop guest, Mikey Wood, at the Three Rivers Con this weekend. John, tell them one last time all about this wonderful show. When is it? Where is it? And how can you get tickets?
ThreeRiversComicCon.com. You can click on tickets. Saturday and Sunday, June 1st and 2nd, starts at 10 both days. 7 o'clock p.m. is the end on Saturday, 5 o'clock on Sunday. Huge guest list. It's all on the website. It's going to be a great time. Some great panels coming up this year. Our programming's gotten a lot better. And we're really excited to see everybody and to put the comics back in Comic-Con, because that's what we do. So
awesome. So yeah, no book recommendations this week outside of The Crow, and just support those people that are bringing those comic books to you. Whether it's through things like Three Rivers Comic-Con, whether it's through New Dimension Comics and the other wonderful comic shops in the Pittsburgh area and beyond. Get out there and support those folks. And then you can always circle back to our website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, Jay, where they can find what else.
Well, link to the merch store. If you're going to a Comic-Con, you're going to need a tote bag. We've got tote bags. You buy all those comics that are at a Comic-Con. And also T-shirts, coffee mugs, this week only, raincoats. That's right. If you find yourself stuck in the Crow's universe, you're going to need a raincoat.
It can't rain all the time.
I was going to say the Crow's universe must be Pittsburgh, because it's supposed to rain for like the next 3 weeks. And it's been raining for 3 weeks.
Well, you also need like a rain hat and like galoshes and all kinds of great stuff. So yeah. And make sure that, again, if you're seeing me out there come over and get a Last Comic Shop magnet. I've got these awesome magnets that you also double as bumper stickers that are removable. I have them on one of the back of my Jeep. Like, you just stick them on the back of your car, it sticks, won't fly off. It's awesome. So come get a Last Comic Shop magnet. Until next week, I was the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Jay Scott and Chad Smith, as well as the wonderful Jon Engel from New Dimension Comics. Love that show, John. Three Rivers Con is awesome. Love your stores, New Dimension Comics. Hope that you can come back to Last Comic Shop soon.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me. It's been great every time.
Until next week, stay safe, stay comic-conning, and remember that it's a crow, not a raven. Things are different.
How do they mess up the bird?
But there is a real live raven that they use.
Because they're bigger. That's probably.
Yeah, that's also true. But the one of them actually was used in all 4 of the movies. So the same raven. Yeah, the same raven. At least the first 3, if
Man,
not 4.
his residual checks must be awesome.
The Last Comic Shop podcast was a 2024 Black Angus production.